It was a cold February evening when Sarah walked into the quaint little town, the streets aglow with heart-shaped decorations and garlands of red and pink. The atmosphere seemed perfect for a celebration of love. However, a strange chill seemed to linger in the air, despite the festive decorations and cheerful couples walking hand in hand along the cobblestone streets. For most, it was just another Valentine's Day, the air filled with promises of romance and affection. But for Sarah, something was terribly off. She couldn't quite explain it, but the town felt wrong. She had arrived a few days earlier to visit her older sister, Emily, who lived in the small town. Emily had invited her to spend Valentine's Day together, a welcome break from her busy life in the city. Sarah had gladly accepted, unaware that her visit would soon turn into a nightmare. The town, named Valentine's Hollow, was known for its picturesque streets and its charming, old-fashioned celebrations of love. It seemed like the ideal place for romance. However, Sarah had heard rumors, whispers that the town harbored a dark history, particularly around Valentine's Day. Strange occurrences, sudden disappearances, and eerie happenings were often tied to the holiday in this isolated corner of the world. But these were just rumors, right? She dismissed them, thinking that surely, those were just superstitions, relics of the past that no one truly believed in anymore. Emily, on the other hand, had never shared Sarah's skepticism. When Sarah had mentioned the odd feelings she had about the town, Emily smiled but said little. "Don't worry about it," Emily had said, her tone strangely distant. "Everyone here celebrates Valentine's Day the same way every year." The first night Sarah arrived, she noticed a large, weathered statue at the center of the town square, a figure of a man, cloaked in tattered robes with an eerie, unsettling expression on his face. It was supposed to be a tribute to Saint Valentine, the patron of love. Yet, there was something about the statue that made Sarah uneasy, as though it were watching her. That night, Sarah lay in bed at Emily's house, trying to ignore the strange feeling gnawing at her. The house creaked and groaned as the wind howled outside, but it was not the storm that unsettled her. It was the feeling that something, or someone, was just outside the window, watching. She glanced out the window several times, but saw nothing. Still, the unease persisted. On Valentine's Eve, Emily seemed even more distant. She spent most of the day preparing for the grand town celebration, but her usual cheerfulness had faded into a strange solemnity. She barely spoke to Sarah, only giving brief, curt answers when Sarah asked questions about the history of the town or the upcoming event. As night fell, the streets began to fill with people dressed in their finest clothes, smiling, laughing, and exchanging gifts. But Sarah noticed something peculiar: no one seemed truly happy. There was a strange tension in the air, as if everyone was merely going through the motions of the holiday, hiding something darker beneath the surface. The sound of laughter seemed hollow, and the warm glow from the streetlights only seemed to cast deeper shadows on the cobblestone streets. The clock struck midnight, and something in the air shifted. As the clock struck midnight, the air seemed to thicken, and the cheerful festivities around Sarah suddenly felt unnerving. The laughter, once so light-hearted, now sounded hollow, almost forced. Sarah couldn't put her finger on it, but something was deeply wrong with the town, and with the people in it. She looked at Emily, hoping for reassurance, but her sister's face was pale, her eyes wide and distant. She had been quiet for much of the evening, barely participating in the celebration, and Sarah could see now that she was barely holding it together. "Emily," Sarah asked, her voice a whisper, "what's going on? Why does everyone seem so strange?" Emily didn't respond at first. She stood motionless for a moment, as though she hadn't heard Sarah's question. Then, slowly, she turned her head toward her younger sister, her face now filled with a deep, haunted expression. "Don't you feel it?" Emily whispered. "The town, it's cursed. It's always been cursed, and so has Valentine's Day. It's more than just a celebration. It's a ritual. A sacrifice." Before Sarah could respond, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, causing the nearby lanterns to flicker. The crowd around them had fallen silent, their eyes fixed on something Sarah couldn't yet see. The streetlights dimmed, casting long shadows that stretched unnaturally along the cobblestones. It felt as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Suddenly, a loud bell rang from the church tower, its deep, foreboding toll echoing through the night. The sound sent a shiver up Sarah's spine, and before she could process what was happening, Emily grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "We need to go," Emily said urgently, pulling Sarah toward a narrow alley. "Now. What's going on? Why are they all?" Sarah started, but her words were cut off by the sounds of footsteps behind them. It was the crowd, moving in a coordinated way, as if they were following some unseen leader. Their faces were no longer joyful, they were cold, expressionless, their eyes fixed on the same distant point. "Don't look at them," Emily warned, her voice trembling. "They're not who they appear to be. They were chosen long ago. This town, it needs to keep its dark promise. And so do we." They reached Emily's house quickly, and she slammed the door shut behind them, locking it. The house felt suffocating now, the air thick with tension. Emily sank down into a chair, her face pale and drawn. "You have to listen to me, Sarah. I didn't want you to know, but you have to understand." Her voice was strained, as though she was fighting against something deep inside her. "This town, Valentine's Hollow, it's bound by an ancient curse. And it's tied to Saint Valentine. The real Saint Valentine wasn't just a symbol of love, he was a dark figure, someone who made a pact to keep the town forever in its grasp. Every year, on Valentine's Day, a soul must be sacrificed in exchange for the town's prosperity and safety. It's how they keep the curse at bay." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean? You're telling me they're going to?" "They want you," Emily said, her eyes wide with terror. "They've chosen you. You're the one. You have to get out of here. I've tried to protect you, but now it's too late. The town won't let you leave. No one can escape what's coming." Before Sarah could speak, there was a loud bang at the door. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed outside, then a low voice called out, "We know you're in there. You can't hide from us forever." Emily gasped and clutched Sarah's wrist, pulling her toward the stairs. "We have to go down into the basement. There's a passage, it leads out of town. It's our only chance." Sarah's heart raced as she followed her sister, the sound of the door being shaken reverberating through the house. She could feel the cold, oppressive atmosphere closing in around her. The walls seemed to pulse, the air heavy with the scent of old incense and decaying roses. They reached the basement, and Emily quickly grabbed a rusted key from a drawer and unlocked a hidden trapdoor. The small opening revealed a narrow stone staircase that descended into the darkness. Emily motioned for Sarah to go first, and without hesitation, they both stepped into the unknown. The stairwell was damp, the air thick with mildew, and the only sound was the faint dripping of water from the walls. As they descended, Sarah's mind raced with questions. Why her? Why Valentine's Day? And what exactly were the people of this town willing to do to keep their cursed tradition alive? At the bottom of the stairs, they entered a vast underground chamber. The walls were lined with stone carvings, depictions of twisted, grotesque figures holding hearts, as though offering them as sacrifices. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, covered in dried red petals and what appeared to be bloodstains. Emily turned to Sarah, her eyes now filled with desperation. "You don't understand. The altar is where it happens. Every year, they perform the ritual. The town feeds on the soul of whoever is chosen. And this year, it's you." "Why me?" Sarah demanded, her voice trembling. "Why am I the one they want?" Emily's face twisted with guilt, her lips trembling as she spoke the truth. "It's because of me. They knew I would never let you go, not without a fight. And they made a deal with me years ago, when I first came to this town. I was supposed to be the one to take your place, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't bear to see you die. So they took me instead, slowly, piece by piece, turning me into one of them, making me part of the ritual. Sarah's mind reeled. She couldn't fathom what her sister was saying. It was too much to process. Her legs felt weak beneath her, and the room seemed to spin. Emily, you've been changed. But you're still my sister, right? You haven't become one of them. Emily looked down at her hands, which now trembled uncontrollably. I'm not sure anymore, she whispered. I'm not sure I ever was. Suddenly, the ground began to shake again, more violently this time. The sound of chanting echoed from above, and Sarah could hear the footsteps of the crowd moving closer, their voices growing louder. The town was closing in, and there was no way out. The ritual was about to begin. You have to run, Emily said, her voice desperate. Go, Sarah. You have to get out of here. I can't stop them, but you can still escape. Don't let them take you. But as Sarah turned to flee, the stone walls of the chamber seemed to shift and close in on her, trapping her in place. The sound of the chanting grew louder, and from the darkness, shadowy figures emerged, those who had once been the townspeople, now twisted and decayed, their faces frozen in grotesque, eternal smiles. The ritual was inevitable. And it was only a matter of time before the soul they sought was claimed. Sarah's heart raced as she stood frozen in the chamber, staring at the twisted figures that now surrounded her. They were once the smiling, cheery townsfolk, but now their eyes were hollow, their faces distorted into expressions of unbearable agony and darkness. The shadows clung to them like a suffocating cloak, and their once colorful clothes were now tattered and covered in filth. The chanting grew louder, louder than the pounding in her ears. The figures moved slowly, methodically, as if they were drawn to her presence. Their hollow eyes fixed on Sarah, and she could feel the weight of their gaze, as if they were looking deep into her soul. There was no escape. The walls of the chamber seemed to shift, twisting and expanding, trapping her in the center of the altar. The door to the trapdoor had vanished, leaving only the cold stone of the chamber behind. Emily stood in front of Sarah, trembling. You have to understand, Sarah, her voice cracked. They won't stop until they get what they came for. The pact has already been sealed. There's no way out. Sarah's mind raced, her breath quickening as she struggled to understand what Emily was saying. But I don't understand. What do they want from me? What is this ritual? The chanting reached a crescendo, and suddenly, one of the figures stepped forward, a tall man, draped in tattered robes, with a long, thin face marked by deep scars. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and his voice, when it came, was like 1,000 whispers in the wind. The time has come, the man intoned, his voice deep and heavy with authority. The chosen one has arrived, and the sacrifice must be made. The curse must be fed to keep this town alive. Sarah's blood ran cold as the realization hit her. The people of Valentine's Hollow weren't merely celebrating love, they were celebrating a twisted, ancient ritual, a practice that demanded a life in exchange for prosperity. Every year, they gave their soul to keep the curse at bay, to keep the town from crumbling into dust. The love they spoke of wasn't pure, it was a facade, a way to lure people in and feed the dark forces that haunted this cursed place. You were chosen, the figure continued, his voice now closer, almost a whisper in her ear. Just as others have been chosen before you. The town will never thrive without this offering. And so, you shall give what is demanded. Sarah stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. No. I won't let you, she shouted, trying to muster courage. You can't have me. I'll fight you. But the man raised a hand, his long, thin fingers curling like claws, and a wave of coldness swept over her. Her body froze. Her lungs felt as though they were being squeezed, her breath shallow and panicked. The others circled her, their faces expressionless, as they began to chant again, louder now, their voices rising in eerie harmony. The words were not in any language Sarah could understand, but they felt ancient, old as time itself. Emily stood motionless, her face blank, her hands trembling at her sides. She could do nothing to stop it. She had already lost her fight years ago. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Emily whispered, her voice thick with guilt. "I couldn't protect you. I wanted to, but I was too weak. I tried to fight them, but I couldn't." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This was not how it was supposed to be. She didn't deserve this. Her sister's face seemed so broken now, as though she had been hollowed out long ago. Emily had been swallowed by the curse, just like all the others. The love she had felt for her sister was no longer enough to save her. She had been chosen, just as Sarah had been chosen now. The tall figure stepped forward again, and with a twisted smile, he spoke in a voice that echoed throughout the chamber. "It is time. The sacrifice will feed the curse, and Valentine's hollow will remain as it is, frozen in time, untouched by decay, but forever bound by the pact of blood." Sarah's knees buckled as the air grew heavier, the weight of fate pressing down on her like a mountain. There was no way out. She had no escape. But just as she thought all hope was lost, something stirred deep within her. A memory flickered, something Emily had said earlier. The ritual. The pact. The altar. Something had triggered the ancient curse, but could there be a way to break it? Was there a way to undo what had been done? It was then that Sarah realized, she wasn't entirely alone. With trembling hands, she reached into the folds of her coat and pulled out the silver locket that had belonged to their mother. It had been passed down through their family for generations, an heirloom of sorts. Emily had told her that it was just a trinket, a keepsake from their mother, but Sarah had always felt it was more. It had always given her a sense of security, a sense of protection. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was something more to it than she had been led to believe. The moment her fingers closed around the locket, a flash of light exploded from it, bright and blinding, pushing the figures away with a violent force. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the air crackled with a strange energy. The cold that had once wrapped itself around Sarah's heart began to recede, and in its place came a warmth, a power unlike anything she had ever felt. The figure in front of her, once towering and menacing, now faltered, stumbling back, as though the light from the locket was burning him. His eyes widened, and he hissed, recoiling from the brilliance. "No," the man whispered, his voice trembling. "You cannot stop it. The curse is eternal. You cannot defy St. Valentine's will." But Sarah's resolve hardened. She wasn't just going to be a victim. She wasn't just going to let them have her. She was going to fight, no matter what it took. With a cry, she threw the locket forward, and the light erupted, filling the entire chamber, washing over the figures, the altar, and the town above. The stone walls cracked and groaned as if the very foundation of the town was being torn apart. The figures screamed, their once human faces twisting in agony as the light burned them away. The tall figure let out a final, deafening scream before he collapsed into a pile of dust, and the others followed suit, dissolving into the air, their curse finally broken. The chamber trembled one last time before everything went silent. And then, as the light began to fade, Sarah found herself standing alone in the now empty room. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight of the curse gone. The altar had crumbled into ruins, the dark energy dissipated. Emily was gone. Sarah sank to her knees, the locket still warm in her hand, tears streaming down her face. She had saved herself, but at a terrible cost. She had lost her sister, lost everything that she had known. Valentine's Hollow was no longer a town of joy and love, it was a hollow shell, abandoned, its curse broken forever. As Sarah stood and made her way back through the crumbling stone passageway, she knew that Valentine's Day would never be the same. She would never again look at the holiday with the same innocent eyes. For love, it seemed, was never pure, and St. Valentine's Day held a darkness far beyond anyone's comprehension. Sarah trudged through the broken passageway, her steps heavy and uncertain. The air around her seemed to hum with a lingering energy, a power that still vibrated from the remnants of the ritual. She glanced back at the crumbled altar, its charred remains still radiating an unnatural warmth. The figures, those twisted souls who had once been the town's inhabitants, were gone, their forms reduced to dust. The curse that had plagued Valentine's Hollow for centuries had finally been broken. But it came at a steep price. Emily. Sarah closed her eyes tightly, trying to hold back the tide of grief. Her sister was gone. She had fought to the end, but the curse had slowly consumed her. Emily had been part of it, unknowingly, from the very beginning. She had been drawn into the town's dark history, bound by the pact that required sacrifice. Emily had done her best to protect Sarah, but in the end, there had been no escaping what the town demanded. It was only Sarah, now, who remained. The door to the basement creaked open, and Sarah stumbled back into the cold night air. The once charming streets of Valentine's Hollow, now eerily silent, stretched before her. The lanterns hung dimly, their glow weak and sickly, casting long shadows on the cobblestones. The sound of the town had changed. Where there had once been laughter and joy, now only the faintest echoes of footsteps could be heard, as though the very life of the place had been drained away. She walked down the street slowly, her eyes fixed on the hollow buildings, once vibrant with love, now desolate and lifeless. The people who had once celebrated Valentine's Day with such fervor were gone, victims of the curse. And the town that had held them in its grasp for so long, was finally free. But was it really freedom? Or was it just an empty shell, devoid of the love it had once seemed to cherish? As Sarah reached the center of the town square, she saw the statue of St. Valentine again, the towering figure that had once seemed so innocent, so benevolent. Now, it looked more like a dark omen, its face twisted in an eternal expression of sorrow. The statue had been the symbol of the town's twisted love, and now it stood as a reminder of all that had been lost. She couldn't bring herself to approach it. She couldn't even bring herself to stay in this place any longer. It was over. The curse was broken. Valentine's Hollow would never again trap anyone in its dark web. But Sarah knew she couldn't stay. Not here, not in a place so steeped in sorrow. The town had lost its heart, and so had she. As she turned to leave, the air seemed to shift once more, and she heard the faint sound of a voice in the distance. It was a soft whisper, just barely audible, but it called to her. Sarah. She froze. It wasn't a voice she recognized. Not at first. But there was something familiar about it. A sense of longing, of loss. A memory echoed in her mind, of a time before the darkness had consumed everything. A time when she and Emily were just two sisters, laughing together, sharing everything. Before Valentine's Hollow had claimed their lives in ways they couldn't have understood. She took a hesitant step forward, her breath quickening. The voice was coming from the direction of the old church, its silhouette looming dark against the sky. Sarah, don't leave. The whisper sent chills down her spine. She wanted to run, to escape this place and never look back. But something held her there, pulling her toward the church. Something deep inside her, buried beneath the sorrow, urged her to go. She entered the church, the doors creaking as she pushed them open. Inside, the air was cold, heavy with the scent of old incense and forgotten prayers. The altar was empty, but there, at the far end of the room, stood a figure, cloaked in shadow. Who's there? Sarah called out, her voice trembling. The figure stepped forward, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was Emily, her sister stood before her, her once bright eyes now empty, hollow, her skin pale and fragile. But there was something different about her, something that wasn't quite right. She seemed ethereal. A part of the darkness that had consumed the town, yet not fully part of it. Emily. Sarah whispered, her heart racing. Is it really you? Emily's lips parted, but no sound came out. Instead, a wave of sadness swept over her. The sorrow was overwhelming. Sarah could feel the grief in her chest, choking her, as though the very air was made of loss. I couldn't protect you, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. I tried. I tried to stop them. But now, it's too late. Emily, no. No, you didn't. Sarah reached out, but her hand passed right through Emily's form. She gasped, recoiling. I'm not here, Sarah, Emily said softly. I'm a part of this place now. I'm the last piece of the curse. The town will never let me go. The tears that Sarah had fought so hard to hold back finally spilled over, her sobs shaking her body. Please, don't leave me. Please, Emily. You can't be a part of this, you can't be lost. But Emily's form flickered like a dying flame, fading into the shadows. I'm not lost, Sarah, she whispered, her voice barely audible now. I'm free. We both are. And with those final words, Emily vanished, leaving nothing but an empty church, the cold air swirling around Sarah like a final embrace. Sarah stood alone in the church, her heart shattered. The final truth hit her all at once. She had broken the curse, but in doing so, she had lost her sister forever. Valentine's Hollow was free, but its cost was immeasurable. Emily had been a part of it all, and in the end, the price of breaking the town's dark grip was her sister's soul. Sarah walked out of the church, her footsteps heavy with grief. The town was now silent, the streets empty. Valentine's Hollow was free, but the love that once filled the town was now nothing more than a distant memory. A memory that would haunt her forever. As she walked into the cold, empty night, she knew that she could never return. She had been touched by the darkness of Valentine's Day, and though the curse had been broken, it had left its mark on her soul. She would carry that darkness with her, always. And so, the town of Valentine's Hollow stood in silence, its curse broken, but its soul forever lost.